Hello， 大家好，我是立恩。我想问大家一个问题：你觉得性自主到底是什么？如果我自己决定我要跟谁从事性行为的话，那对我而言究竟会有妨害，还是一点妨害都没有，甚至可能带来好处？我们都知道，现在的社会早已把性自主标榜成为一个人人都可以自由决定的事情，对吧？那更不要说现在是一个笑贫不笑娼的年代了哈。你呢可以透过性来大发利市、大赚奇财。特别是近年兴起的 OnlyFans 这个网络平台呢，更是把许多素人，特别是女性短短时间之内就可以晋升到千万级美元富豪这样子的身价。因为很简单，只要你愿意把自己私密的影片或照片分享出来，或者甚至是把自己跟他人发生性关系的影片分享在这个平台上，你就可以借此收取高额的会员费。许多女性呢纷纷趋之若鹜，都加入了。Netflix 呢，它本身就是一个当初因为自己经济拮据窘迫呢，所以跟丈夫讨论之后，决定某种程度上轻微尝试 OnlyFans 这个平台的女性。她也是一名素人，结果没想到呢，在短短时间之内，她发现只要分享一些自己裸露的照片，那可以赚取到高额的报酬时候，她就开始大胆起来，甚至在丈夫的一个支持之下呢，她就愿意开始对外尝试招募跟许多男性发生性关系。而这件事情最后仍然被她的父母知道呢。本来父母是从震惊，但也因为 Netflix 已经非常有钱，给买了许多名贵的礼物给父母之后呢，父母亲的态度也越趋变成开放，转而支持，看似好像整个家族都在支持他从事这么一个前卫且又能够表达女性自主的工作。但是她的婚姻也因为她踏入了 OnlyFans 之后呢，与丈夫之间彼此产生的矛盾跟嫌隙还有隔阂越来越多，最终仍然以离婚收场。离婚后的 Lily Phillips 呢，并没有因此就放弃这个产业，因为在这个里头赚到的金钱实在是太大，太有诱惑了。
臣妾做不到
所以他发起了一项新的企划，他在网络平台上对外宣称他要与100名男性同时发生关系。而这一项企划一公布之后呢，许多慕名而来的男士可以说是如雪片般倾巢而出，纷纷响应。看似 Lilyface 要靠这个企划又要发一笔网络流量的大财的时候呢，没有想到在他做完了这一次企划之后，结束了跟100名男士高速激烈的这个活塞运动后呢，他在镜头前却忍不住哭了起来，并且落泪。到底一个人如果自己都完全的自愿与多人从事性关系，又可以赚取钱财，带给家人更高生活品质，这一切看似好像都没有任何的不妥的时候，为什么 Lily Phillips 仍然忍不住哭了起来？难道性这件事情终究不是一个人可以自主决定自己认定想怎么做就怎么做的事情吗？我们今天呢，就是要带大家一起来看保守派知名的政治评论员 Ben Shapiro 呢，在他的 Ben Shapiro Show 里面，就针对 Lily Phillips 这起事件有一个非常棒的节目分析。我今天特别把这一段影片介绍给大家，让我们一起好好来想想，我们真的可以把性当作只是一个欢愉的工具吗？还是在工具的背后，性更深层次的连接到的是我们人的灵魂一个重要的位置呢？我们一起来看。
Well, folks, there's something deeply broken about our society, and sometimes there are just some pretty egregious symptoms of that being the case. One of those symptoms is a person whose name is Lily Phillips. Lily Phillips is 23 years old, and right now she's become quite prominent because she has a very lucrative OnlyFans account where she earns millions of dollars to take her clothes off and have sex in front of men. And back in October, Lily Phillips did a stunt, and did is the operative word here. This stunt involved having sex with 101 men in a day. Well, she did that back in October. She did a documentary about it titled I Slept With 100 Men in One Day, so aptly titled. YouTuber Josh Peters was the person who helped her make this documentary. And here she was talking about the experience.
When was the last time you ate? I think I had a yum yum, and I think I had a sandwich, and that was kind of, and then the rest. It's not for the weak, girls. If I'm honest, it was hard. I don't know if I'd recommend it.
Why not?
I think if you're a different type of girl, it's very like, it's kind of like being a prostitute in a sense of like, it's just a different feeling. I don't know how to explain it, like...
It's not like just having sex with someone.
Yeah. Just one in, one out, like it feels intense.
Like more intense than you thought it might.
Definitely.
好，那因为刚刚Ben Shapiro 他并没有播放完整的，就是 Lily Philip 在100人多人运动之后完整的心情的影片哈，所以我特别另外再翻译制作给大家看。那片长只有2分钟，我们一起来看 Lily Philip 他是怎么来描述的。
I think I was you know when I talked to you last, like I was not nervous, it was like the day before I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. But it was good. It was more, I guess the interactions when like, I'd have to stop them early and like, you'd have to stand on business and be like, I'm so sorry, you got to go. And like the awkward interaction of like you feeling pressure to have to make them come if like you haven't spent enough time with them and feeling like they didn't, like you didn't give them a good time because like they only got 2 minutes.
And that's what's making you feel emotional, is that maybe you think you didn't give some guys a good enough time today?
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, having the interactions with them when they're like, what, you're not going to make me finish, I've come all this way, like kind of like guilt tripping me a little bit. I felt bad, like some people had just travelled so far, like I didn't want to give them a shit time and like come away from this and be like, oh, that was shit. I think sometimes like feeling so like robotic, like by I think like the 30th, you know, like when we're getting on a bit, I've got like a routine of like how we're going to do this. And like, it just, sometimes you'd like disassociate and be like, you know, like it's not like normal sex at all. In my head right now, I can think of like 5, 6 guys, 10 guys that I remember. And that's it. But it's just, I don't know, it's just weird, isn't it? Like, if I didn't have the videos, I wouldn't have known I've done 100, you know? But yeah, I think that was kind of the hard part, is like conversing with them and like when they'd kind of be like, oh, like we've only had 2 minutes or 3 minutes and you said 5 on the message.
Did someone say that to you?
Yeah. And obviously it just makes me feel so bad.
Do you think you should feel bad about that?
I guess when you've promised something to people who support you, it's kind of hard to let them down.
But it's up to you, right? Like when you know.
Yeah.
Have you even processed, do you think, what's happened?
Not yet. God, I won't forget this day, Jesus.
When I decided to start making this documentary, I wasn't too sure of what to expect. I certainly didn't expect to see Lily so upset at the end of it all. I thought perhaps in years to come she may look back at this day in sadness, but not so instantly afterwards. She had stressed to me throughout my time with her how excited she was for this challenge and how this was her fantasy, so to see her so visibly upset at the end of it all was really sad.
Okay, and she ends up breaking down in tears, basically. She says, quote, I think by the 30th, when we're getting on a bit, I've got a routine of how we're going to do this, and sometimes you dissociate, and it's not like normal sex at all. She admitted that she did not remember much of this. She said, in my head right now, I can think of 5, 6, 10 guys I remember, and that's it. But it's just weird, isn't it? If I didn't have the videos, I wouldn't have known I did 100. She said it wasn't just the physical intimacy of having sex with so many men that made her feel so bad, but also disappointing them by not being able to talk with them or even being interested in doing so. She said talking with the gentleman was hard. Gentleman, of course, is a term of art here, and recounted how one man complained they only chatted for about 2 minutes when she had said beforehand they would talk for about 5 minutes. So she had already broken down. We can see in the video that she's been crying and all the rest. Well, none of this is apparently stopping her from taking on a new challenge now because the money is too good. I like in that video where she suggests that she feels like a prostitute. Well, yes, definitionally having sex for money would be prostitution. She has claimed she wants to take on a new challenge in January, according to the New York Post. 1,000 men in 24 hours. Male talent casting call, 18 plus only. Location to be determined. I dreamed it up with my assistant. I can't wait. It's very exciting. It will be a world record, a real challenge, she claimed. Apparently, the current world record is held by a person named Lisa Sparks, an adult film star who bedded 919 men in one day at a sex industry event in Poland back in 2004. Sparks said, to be completely transparent with you all, this event is the one thing I regret doing in the 23 plus years in the porn industry to this day. It was the only job I agreed to perform strictly for the money. Well, I doubt that that is true. Okay, so here is the thing about all this. And it is screwed up in 1,000 different ways. As a columnist for the UK Daily Mail named Jane Fryer writes, she says that this talking to Lily is like bobbing into a parallel universe where everything is upside down, where Gen Z bodies are for sale like sweets, sex is nothing more than a numbers game, and parents, even grandparents of porn, apparently, are, quote, very supportive. Lily's mother is her head of finance. I can't imagine why she's so screwed up. According to this columnist, Lily herself, a bubbly, beautiful, articulate, and immaculately mannered girl, chatters on and on in exactly the same perky tone as she did about her family Christmas or her beloved dog Maggie, about how she graduated from posting sneaky peeks to full-blown porn on her hugely lucrative OnlyFans account, how she earns over 6 figures a month and employs 8 staff, all women, and how the only way to achieve the 1,000 will be with a human conveyor belt. Ideally, we will do it in a big warehouse with 2 doors. I'm hoping a couple of seconds each at most, and on their way. So let's be clear. The question here is why this is wrong. Really, this is a question, why this is wrong. In our modern society, I have a feeling there are a lot of people who are going to have a hard time explaining why this is wrong. Really, what's the big problem? For a lot of folks, particularly on the secular left, that's a relevant question. After all, she's engaging in consensual activity. Why is this wrong? Why is this bad? Well, this shows the shortcomings of consent as the only value. See, we live in a society in which consent is considered the highest and perhaps the only value. That's because we've largely bought into the liberal framework for how society ought to run. So the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, his first famous book was a book called The Righteous Mind. And according to Jonathan Haidt, there are 6 moral matrices, kind of different measures of how we measure morality. The first is care versus harm. The second is liberty versus oppression. The third is fairness versus cheating. The fourth is loyalty versus betrayal. The fifth is authority versus subversion. And the sixth is sanctity versus degradation. So, for example, care versus harm would be whether you're compassionate if you see a suffering human being. Right? That's one value system. Liberty versus oppression would be if you see an unjust rule being promulgated that oppresses someone versus is that person free to make their own choices. Fairness or cheating would be if somebody cheats you. It's unfair because somebody has cheated you. Loyalty versus betrayal would be if someone betrays a group. Authority versus subversion is if somebody disrespects legitimate authority. And sanctity versus degradation is if somebody does something disgusting, for example. Well, as it turns out, liberals and conservatives, left versus right, they think of the world in a very different way from one another. Liberals are interested in only about 3 of these 6 matrices. They're interested in the question of care versus harm, so compassion, liberty versus oppression, so the idea of your individual rights and individualism. And finally, fairness versus cheating. Is the final outcome of a system fair or are rights distributed fairly? Conservatives, people on the right, care about all 6 of those matrices, right? Including things like loyalty and betrayal, authority and subversion, and most importantly, sanctity versus degradation. So if you're on the left, what do you do about somebody like Lily Phillips? Well, theoretically, you could make the argument that she's harming herself, right? That this violates the sort of care harm principle. That's why what she's doing is wrong. But that runs up directly against the liberty foundations of liberalism, right? Because after all, she's the one who has volunteered her consent into it. How can you tell her, can you be paternalistic enough to suggest that she has harmed herself under the rubric of leftism? And also, is it unfair that she did this? Well, I mean, she did accept the arrangement. In fact, she sought the arrangement. In fact, she's being paid by the tonnage for this arrangement. If you're a conservative, the answer is actually quite easy. Lily Phillips here, and women like her, who make themselves cheap, are engaging in self-harm. Liberty is not libertinism. It is bounded by rules. Fairness is not implicated here because she has no right to engage in this sort of conduct on a moral level. She has no moral right. She may have a legal right. That's not the same thing as having a moral right to do this sort of stuff. She is being disloyal not only to any boyfriend she might have, but to the standards of her society and to humanity at large. You're being disloyal to humanity when you violate yourself this way. She is undermining the authority of basic morality. And most importantly, what she is doing is disgusting. Now, I know that word has sort of fallen out of usage. Disgust, disgusting. And the idea in sort of modern left-wing parlance is that if you talk about something being disgusting, it means that you're being judgmental. So, for example, Jonathan Haidt, in this book, The Righteous Mind, he talks about the fact that when he teaches his college students, one of the questions he will ask them is it immoral for you to have sex with a frozen chicken? Liberals will say, maybe, and then they'll think about it and they'll think, no, it doesn't violate my principles of consent. It doesn't violate the care-harm matrix. It's a violation of liberty to say that it is disgusting or problematic or wrong. There's nothing unfair about having sex with a chicken. Conservatives are like, yeah, it's gross, it's wrong, you're degrading yourself. Disgust is a useful thing. It has actually kept human beings alive for eons. Originally, it evolved as a way of naturally driving people away for things that are quite bad for them. The reason that human beings have a reaction of disgust when they see, for example, a snake is because snakes can kill people. Now, that does not mean that all disgust historically is proper. Sometimes human beings are disgusted at behaviors or traits that are perfectly legitimate or have arisen through no fault of the person you're disgusted by. So, for example, there are a lot of primitive cultures where people with mental disabilities are found to be disgusting. In ancient Sparta, you have a disabled baby and you leave it out on a cliff somewhere. But disgust, as a general human emotion, is a response to the violation of the sacred. So what exactly is the sacred? The sacred is the thing that we as a species place beyond question. That's what sacred means. Sacred means that you are taking something and you now declare it holy. And for something to be holy means it is separate from the secular. It is something that is not to be questioned. It is something that of such high value that to question it would undermine the entire society. To throw away the sacred is to throw out one of the things that is most important in building a society. Again, there are some things we find so sacred that we will not violate them. The philosopher Robert Nisbet, in a book called The Twilight of Authority, writes about this. He says, the greatest of all distinctions the human mind is capable of, according to Emil Durkheim, another sociologist, is that between the sacred and the profane or merely utilitarian. Even the distinction between good and evil is small by comparison, for both good and evil are representations of the sacred, positive or negative. Nisbet says, rightly did Emil Durkheim declare the sacred, but the other side of the coin on which community is written. Human aggregates are possible, or at least conceivable, without a sense of the sacred, but not, Durkheim declared, community. You can't get an entire community together to share the same values unless they agree on a concept of the sacred and the profane, things that are so high in value that they are not worth arguing about, and to argue with them should actually generate a feeling of disgust. It is community, says Robert Nisbet, that gives to the sacred its most vital expressions everywhere: birth, marriage, death, and other moments in the human drama. These are all things of such high value that we place at such a premium that they become sacred. So, in the case of Lily Phillips, what is sacred here? Well, how about the individual human soul? How about the individual human soul? You do not own your own soul. It does not belong to you. You have duties attached to the stewardship of your soul. How about your innate humanity, made in the image of God? You as a human being are sacred. You're the sacred property of the divine. After all, whatever disgusting substances this woman has anointed herself with, those can be washed off. But her soul can't be washed off without repenting of what she has done to herself. And she knows that. Why do you think she's breaking down? Why do you think she's upset? It's not just because of the physical exertion. It's because she made herself into a sex robot. She made herself into something profane. She did a profane thing, and she should be disgusted with herself. She should be ashamed of herself. And a society should be able to look at that behavior and say, that is wrong behavior. It is not just a matter of moral apathy. Because a society that greenlights this sort of behavior or celebrates it or pays people millions of dollars for this sort of behavior gets more of it. It reduces the humanity in all of us to the level of the animal. It removes the sacred completely. And then all you're left with is the profane. And you cannot build any community, any workable society on the profane alone. Human beings, we have a natural understanding of the sacred. We have a natural understanding, a desire to worship, a desire to understand there are things that are of eternal value. This is why, by the way, the concept of consent when it comes to sex is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Meaning, of course, consent is necessary to sex, but it is not the only marker of whether sex itself is a good thing or a bad thing in how people engage in it. It's because we've lost the concept of the sacred and the profane, for example, that I think some things have happened in the Me Too movement. So, for example, in the Me Too movement, there is a phenomenon that has arisen many times where women will consent to sex with someone they should not have consented to sex to. they'll treat themselves badly, and then they'll wake up the next morning and they'll decide they didn't like it. And they don't have the language to even express what it is they don't like because they already gave consent. And you can't ungive the consent. So then they go to the language of consent again. They'll say that they were raped in some cases when they weren't actually raped or the evidence shows they weren't raped. But they're not wrong to feel bad about themselves. They're not wrong to feel bad about the decision making. Regret is an understanding that you have taken something sacred and you have made it profane. And the relationship between two people who love one another in a committed bond, that is a sacred thing. That's what makes sex sacred rather than profane. And if you treat it as a profane thing, well, a lot of the time, profane things are going to feel profane to you. You might wake up in the morning and feel degraded because maybe you degraded yourself. And then people look for an excuse for why they feel the way they do, but they don't even have the language to explain why they feel the way they do. This is particularly true of young women who are engaging in activities that later they regret. They don't even understand why they regret, but the answer is that we are all, men and women, all of us are capable of sullying ourselves, of disgusting ourselves. Okay? And that is a worthwhile tendency in human beings to recognize that sometimes when we look at the behavior of somebody like a Lily Phillips here, she should be upset, and we should be upset that as a society we have decided that the OnlyFans society is fine and decent and good. It is not. It is not fine and decent and good. Pornography ought to disgust us because it is disgusting. It should disgust us because it takes something that should be about commitment and love and turns it into something that is simply about rutting. It takes something that is meaningful, but not because it is just a matter of consent, because it is a matter that has meaning attached to it and has throughout human history. And pretending that people don't have emotions connected to sex is one of the most ridiculous aspects of the modern feminist movement and the modern secular left. I mean, even Lily Phillips acknowledges this. She says, I didn't even get to talk to the guys. It's the most pathetic sort of expression of the problem. But she's not wrong. It turns out that both women and men, very often, they actually want to know the person with whom they are having sex because it means something beyond just pure consent. A society that boils its morality down to consent alone is a society that doesn't even have the language to express why it's corrupting itself. It's why we as a society have such trouble saying that, by the way, pornography is morally bad, saying that OnlyFans is a blight. It is. OnlyFans is a blight. Young men are being destroyed by OnlyFans. Young women are certainly being destroyed by OnlyFans. And this should not be a matter of moral apathy in our society. Again, I'm not talking about regulation or legislation. Perhaps that's appropriate, but that's not even the question. The question is, do we even have the moral language anymore to look at human behavior that ought to disgust us and say, it's okay to be disgusted by that behavior. It's okay to look at things that violate the nature of what it means to be made in the sacred image of God and say, that's bad, and I have an innate sense of being provoked by it into disgust. It's okay. We were made that way, and that's not a terrible thing. Again, a society that loses any concept of the sacred and trades the sacred for the profane is a society that is not long for this world. Because in the end, if we can't place certain principles above and beyond debate in the realm of the sacred, such as, for example, the value of human life, if you cannot do that, then you're not going to have a society for very long.
好，最后我想说呢，我认为Lily Phillips 如果当初没有因为经济的缘故而妥协自己跟丈夫选择尝试进入这个 OnlyFans 的平台，开始贩售自己的色情影片来获利的话呢，坦白说，我个人主观都相信她今天也不会跟她的先生走上离婚这一条道路。虽然这个听起来很主观，但是我们至少都同意，就是性本身它是一个人自身最大的亲密关系当中的一项。好，另外一项我们可以说的亲密关系，那恐怕就是母亲怀胎10月后生出孩子跟孩子在哺乳当中的那一份亲密关系。我们从来不会有人说，看到一个母亲在哺乳孩子的时候，说那个亲密的时刻只是一个动物繁衍的行为，而说它不神圣，对吧？所以人自始至终都有一个对于亲密关系神圣化这样子的一个观点。这个观点的起源并不是文化上去形塑出来的，这样的观点其实对于人自身而言并没有什么实质上的利害关系。但是神圣化的观点是因为呢，其实是因为上帝在造我们人的时候，上帝 跟人渴望建立亲密的关系，所以他跟亚伯拉罕在旧约圣经里一开始最早的时候就立约。同样的，性在圣经里是怎么说的呢？在希伯来书13章4节说，婚姻人人都当尊重，床也不可污秽，因为苟合行淫的人，神必要审判。圣经哥林多前书6章18到20节也说，你们要逃避淫行，人所犯的无论什么罪，都在身子以外，唯有行淫的是得罪自己的身子。岂不知你们的身子就是圣灵的殿吗？这圣灵是从神而来，住在你们里头的，并且你们不是自己的人，因为你们是重价买来的，所以要在你们的身子上荣耀神。你会发现其实很少像圣经里头这样子特别把性归类在神圣跟堕落的一个分别。好，在这个里头，上帝让性成为把两个人彼此能够牢牢的抓住，彼此愿意委身在婚姻关系里头一个关键。所以在婚姻里头，性当然很重要。我们也知道说，很多人常讲说可是这个很多人婚姻不美满，也因为性生活不顺利，或是怎么样，这个也都没有错。但是至少反过来让我们看到说，性对婚姻它本身的影响都很大了。那更何况就是说，我们今天如果滥用性，我们把性作为只是一个可以拿来赚钱的工具的时候，你看到 Lily Phillips， 我不知道各位观众朋友，你自己看的感觉是怎么样？我自己觉得，虽然因为他邀请了另外的这个男生来录这个所谓的纪录片，那这个男生其实并没有入内参观那这个男生是等到 Lily Phillips 已经大战100人之后才出来，才接受访问的时候，我觉得他在镜头前面对这个男生说的很多的话呢，包含他说他觉得很不好意思，对于很多来的男生都给的时间太短。可是你会发现，他其实脸上的那一个泪水是一直忍不住流下来的。那个并不像是一般我们对于所谓商业买卖行为当中觉得对顾客抱歉而会流出来的泪水。他其实内心当中，他有一个触动是他不敢在镜头前面明说的，但是他稍微表达出来的一个比较让我们约略一窥相近的一句话，就是他觉得他自己像个机器人。Ben Shapiro 比较犀利了就直接说，你其实感觉你自己就像是个妓女嘛，但是我觉得他的那个泪水其实并不是来自于自己不愿意，因为他是愿意的，他本来就想要靠这个事情成名，然后获取更多的金钱，他是完全愿意的，甚至他已经走上这条路，他都已经离婚的状况了，他并没有什么爱的人的包袱或者是残累。可是我觉得 Lily Phillips 他流出来的泪水是什么？我觉得那个是伤到他神性的那一面，也就是人里头我们讲的有灵性的这一层面。当我们人在最终的时候，我们的灵性会越来越渺小，然后罪性越大的时候呢，我们其实所反映在外界各样的一个行为模式，你就会发现会很动物化。罪就是靠弱肉强食，你死我活，没有什么分别。我们会失去掉很多道德或良知的这一个顾虑，而这样子的人，其实我认为是很可怜也很危险的。为什么？因为他会习惯，他如果从这一层看明白说他这样做只会伤害他的灵魂的话，我认为他其实是有机会跳离出来的。那至于他有没有，我不知道，但是我在这边要跟观众朋友分享，就是性这件事情，亲密的关系在人的行为模式里头，就像 Ben Shapiro 强调一样，它其实是一个道德层面的问题，而道德层面的问题永远就有神圣面以及堕落面。你愿意走堕落，没有人会拦阻你，但是后果要自负。Lily Phillips 之前呢，金氏世界纪录的保持人就是1999年的金霍尔西。金霍尔西他就曾经演出一个纪录片呢，在那个时候他最终在8小时之内完成了620次的性行为，创下了最高纪录。他那个时候知名度飙升，登上多个电视节目，甚至跟唱片公司签约，而且他还以高价去拍卖他的身体组织。他的生活一时看似风光无限，但是最后他深陷毒瘾和财务危机。到了2002年，也才短短的3年内，他的房产被法拍，赚来的钱几乎挥霍殆尽。然后他还渐渐的对于整形这件事情非常的执迷，也越来越失控，一直呢频繁的进行手术来维持外貌，导致他的健康问题不断恶化。后来他在一本他的自传叫做《足够美丽：群交女王的故事》这一本书里头呢，他提到说，这一部纪录片 让他对自己的选择产生了深深的懊悔。如果你真的能够这么如此享受性，你又这么能够靠性来赚钱、成名、走红，那为什么人还会后悔呢？这就是因为人自己知道，我们的灵魂的深处仍然能够察觉到，有些事情一旦做了，那个事情就不再神圣了，是堕落的。其实无论你相不相信人有灵魂说，你自身的道德良知都足以让你在很多生活各方面的时候，是不是都常常会有一些声音会提醒你，好比说这个事情不要做，因为你觉得心里会过不去。所以观众朋友，我觉得今天分享 Lily Phillips 这个事情很棒的一个地方，就是让我们真的去思考说，像性这么亲密、这么高度讲究彼此两人契合，而且要建立足够的信任，才能够去释放自己的身体给对方，这样子的一个神圣的行为的时候，我们是不是可以去思考说，会不会有可能，其实当停止一些错误的生活上面的一些性行为的时候，很多的医学研究都表明说，停止一些错误的性关系的行为，对于人的一个自身的精神跟恢复自我的自信跟尊严都有很高的正面帮助。我们之前也谈过2期，一个是在约炮行不行，还有另外一个就是 Jordan Peterson 跟 Brett 小姐呢来讨论两性互动的关系，都非常推荐去看。那很高兴今天跟大家分享到这边，我们这边是超级神队友，我们就下期影片再见，拜拜。
Christ alone.